Hello and welcome to Making a First-Person Shooter Using the Gameplay Ability System. I'm Thomas M, and today, for the first time ever, I'm going to be doing this series in Unreal Engine 5. And just so you know, I'm in Unreal Engine 5 Early Access. I'm in Early Access 2, so there are some issues with my current build, and as a result, we're going to be doing most of our work today in Blueprints because I'm not able to create new C++ classes. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a first-person template project so we can have some basis of code to go off of. And then I'm going to make it a C++ project so that I can add a couple of things to the base character C++ class. There's a little bit that you have to do in C++ just to get this project set up. So this is the only way that I've really found a path to success at this current point. So I'm going to go ahead and call mine GAS to it and hit create. So while this is going, I'm going to talk about the first thing we're going to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to activate the ability system inside of the engine. It is a plugin, and like most plugins, we'll go into the plugins window and we'll activate it. But then there's an additional step we have to do to have access to the actual code that drives the system so we can write our own C++ code using those files. And that'll be in our build.cs file. So for some reason, this comes up every time for me, project file out of date. I've been updating it each time. I also get the plugins manager. You can go ahead and open it there, or if it doesn't pop up for you, you can go to edit plugins and pop open this window and search for gameplay abilities. And you want to enable the gameplay abilities plugin and go ahead and hit restart now. So it helps to restart the editor when you first activate the plugin and then activate the code modules. I'm not entirely sure why, but I've had some compile errors a couple times and had to start completely over. In project name folder, there's a file that is project name.build.cs. Need to add to this line in here, gameplay abilities and gameplay tags. And that just tells it to compile most of the ability system. Now we have our ability system activated. We've compiled the modules. So now we can create abilities. And in order for the ability system to run, our character has to have a component. And this component is called the ability system component, and it works as the brains of the operation. So this component holds all of the abilities that your character can do throughout the game. So an ability we're going to have is like fire weapon. Then we'll have another ability that's like reload weapon. And these two need to interact with one another. Like we can only fire the weapon when we have bullets in the chamber. Instead of firing, if we don't have any ammunition, we need to instead kick off reloading. And if we're reloading and we hit the fire button with like a shotgun where you're loading one round at a time and then you pull the trigger and it immediately cancels your reload and starts firing instead. And then on like a semi-automatic, you might not want that to always be present. And the ability system component is what manages those abilities. So we need to give our character an ability system component. So I need the C++ base class. So I'm just going to open the blueprint and then open it from here by clicking on the parent class. Now in our character, so we need to give them the component. So we need to have the code from the component. So we're going to include it. Ability system component.h is the name of the file. And then I will put mine on the bottom. I'm going to make this private. It's a U ability system component, and it's a pointer to an ability system component. And I'm going to call this M underscore ability system component. And I'm going to make this a U property so that I can replicate it in the event that I want to replicate this component or decide to make it a multiplayer game. I'll go ahead and add the tag in now. Because if I'm going to do multiplayer, I'm going to do a listen server, and we have to do full replication with a listen server pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark it replicated. I'm not going to worry about that right now. All right, so compile complete tells me IntelliSense is lying to me, and it does. It did find the ability system component class. So I'm now going to initialize this component in the constructor. So I'm going to copy the name. I'm going to open my CPP class, and then in the constructor, which is the name of the class with no input or output parameters, I'm just going to add my lines to the bottom. Set this is equal to create subobject or default subobject of type uAbility system component. And it wants a name or it wants a text. So that should give me an ability system component on my character. All right, compile complete. So if I look at my first person character now, I don't think I can see it in the data only, but in the full blueprint editor, I can see the ability system component. Now it's private and it's not exposed to blueprints in any way, so we don't have a way to access it from our blueprint code. Now, the ability system uses an interface to generically access the ability system component from the actor. It's something that's used throughout the system, and it's highly advised that you go ahead and implement this interface. So we're going to include the code for the interface. This is ability system interface dot h. Then we're going to go ahead and inherit it. Ability system interface. And I'm going to go ahead and peek it so I can get the function definition. So this just has one function in it that is get ability system component. And I'm just going to grab that. That function definition and add the word override. I'm going to go ahead and declare it in line. We're going to return the ability system component. Compile. All right. So now we have an ability system component and we have an interface function that is get ability system component that allows us to access that component in our blueprints or anywhere else. All right, so now the first thing I want to do is I want to replace the existing system with a little bit of gameplay ability support. So right now in the character, there's a function called fire or on fire, right? Which is when you pull the fire trigger. And right now it holds all of the logic involved with creating your projectile and launching it forward or pointing it in the correct direction based on a muzzle location that is placed on the character. And it has the projectile class. Everything is set inside of the character. Now, the ability system is designed to be modular. It's designed to be a system where your character can just say, pull trigger on whatever weapon it is I happen to be holding, and then the weapon sort of brings in its data and applies an ability to the character, and the character's ability then drives firing the actual weapon. Spawning the projectile or doing the ray tracing and then applying damage to targets is done through gameplay effects, but all of it, all the logic, all the power is done through the gameplay ability. So we're going to move all of this code into an ability. Now, normally I would declare this as a C++ class, and then I would just copy this code and paste it in there. I would just sort of fix up the references so you could see that we can do the exact same thing that we've normally done. We're just going to encapsulate it in this ability. And I really like to do that from a teaching standpoint, but I'm not actually able to do that right now because I can't create new C++ classes. So we're actually just going to recreate this in an ability that's entirely blueprint driven. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that I remember exactly how the fire ability looks so I know what it is I'm looking for. So I can spam it as fast as I want. It doesn't even have to finish playing the animation before I can just spam it again. And it seems to just restart the montage and default blend. Okay. So if I remember correctly, yes, it prioritizes spawning the weapon first, or it's not the weapon, sorry, the projectile. It spawns the projectile first, and then it says, go ahead and try playing a montage. So the montage has nothing to do with its ability to fire. This is a little counterintuitive, but I'm actually going to match the pattern they did here. A, because I want to recreate the system as close to the way as it is in the template for educational purposes, and B, because as a first-person shooter, the first priority is creating the bullet, is making the shoot action happen. And if that doesn't happen, none of the other stuff needs to happen. And if you think about a gun, like kind of the bullet shoots first and then you react to it happening. First person shooters are interesting. I haven't worked on one for I've only done prototypes, so it's always interesting for me to go into first person shooters. Anyway, so I'm going to create an ability and give it to my character. So first I'm going to create a slot on my character for the ability, and I'm going to create the system to fire it, and then I'm going to create the ability and put it into that slot. That way I have a way to fire it and a way to see something happening in the engine as quickly as possible, so I can know that my setup is good and everything's good to go as early as possible. So I'm going to give myself a slot for an ability, and this will be a protected variable because I want to set it in a blueprint. It's a U property. I'm going to edit defaults only. This just keeps. This is a subclass. T subclass of the type U gameplay ability. This is class U gameplay ability. We're going to call this primary fire ability. So that will give me a drop down in my character, well, where I will be able to select a gameplay ability. Right now it's just going to be in defaults. That's what this does here. This is what T subclass of does, is creates a drop down where you can select a child class of the class type that you fed into the template. And then I just need to give this ability to my player. So I'm going to do this on begin play. You could also do setup player input component. It's one way to do it, but sometimes that gets called multiple times, like if you possess and unpossess your pawn. So you really want to be careful with when you bind abilities to input because you want to be able to control that. And you also want to be careful in like a multiplayer environment. So on the ability system component, I say give ability. F gameplay ability spec, which I believe I have to include. Gameplay ability spec.h works just fine. Okay. So I need the gameplay ability, which means I have my primary fire ability. Get default objects. And for level, I'm going to go ahead and put 0 for now. Level is a very simple way to feed in an extra integer along with your data with an ability, and then it's queryable through the scalable float system in gameplay effects. Level is a thing that's built into the ability system because obviously this is built for mobile games where level is important. So I'm going to go ahead and put the input ID as 1. So the input ID is the awesome tool built into the ability system where we can just connect input, and I'm going to pass into this pointer as the source object. So everything done by this ability is the thing that's going to be held responsible for it is this, our character. So the other thing I need to do is when we go to fire the weapon, I don't want to fire it anymore inside of the character class. Instead, I'm going to comment all of that out and just call ability local input pressed. I want to pass in the integer 1, and that will fire whatever ability is bound to input ID 1. And that compiles fine. So now I don't have an ability in here. So right now, if I hit play and then I click to fire, it's actually going to crash. Or actually, if I hit play, it'll crash. Sorry, not if I hit fire. If I just hit play, it'll crash because I put in no contingency to make sure that there was an ability before trying to give it to the ability system component. So I need to go ahead and catch for that. So if primary fire ability is valid low level fast. So that will just check if this is a valid class. So the next thing I need to do is create an ability to give it. So I'm going to hit Control Spacebar to bring up my content drawer. And I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder called Blueprints. And in here, I'm going to make a folder called Abilities. And I'm just going to make it in here. So I'll make a gameplay ability blueprint. So I'm going to make the base class of mine a gameplay ability. And then I'm going to rename it to GA, which is a shorthand for gameplay ability. So GA underscore fire weapon. I'm going to pop that open. Then I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's found in my content browser and go ahead and select it using a little arrow here, or you can do it from the drop down. Doesn't really matter. So I'm going to set it to GA fire weapon. Then just to make sure that everything I've done so far works, the first thing I'm going to do is drag off of activate ability. I'm just going to print a string that says hello. And then I'm going to end the ability. And through the magic of cinema, it's not only printing a string, but it's now actually creating the entire bullet. Look, wasn't that just magic? So what happened there was I got a really weird bug that I have not figured out exactly what it is that happened, but it was telling me that I didn't have an ability system component, telling me that it never got initialized. I went so far as to copy and paste my class definitions, and it still refused to work and refused to give me an ability system component. So I am reverting to, I'm going to have to use my practice project. So the only thing that's really different here is I went ahead and took care of the multiplayer setup. That's really the big difference. So we have ability system component is still named the same. I just have the replicated equals true. Flag is actually functional now because I've included the runtime engine Unreal Network header file. So that allowed my replicated tag to work, and that also allows me to override this function that is get lifetime replicated props. So this is a default function in the engine that you have to use when you're networking, where if you want to replicate a component or a variable or anything across the network, you need to implement it in this function. If you don't implement it, Unreal will give you a warning in your output log and say, hey, just so you know, this isn't actually going to work. And it even includes like the function definition right there. It's very easy to sort of pick this up. It's one of those little nuance things. So they sort of red flag all over the place to let you know that this function's here and you need to implement it. There are a bunch of variations of do rep lifetime. Each controls replication in a different way. I am not a networking engineer. That is well above my pay grade, so I'm not going to pretend to know what all of them do exactly or how it all works. I just know that this setup will work for a listen server pattern. I hope somebody does an in-depth networking tutorial on this. I would love to see that. I would love to learn more about it myself. So that's how you set up replication. The other thing I did, oh yes, when I give the ability, I make sure I only give it on the server. So this way the server gets the ability and then that replicates to the client. Actually, I think that's not how I want to do it. I think I want to give it to both because I think that doesn't, yeah, that doesn't direct replicate the way that I want it to. I want to actually have two copies so that I can properly local predict them. So I want to get rid of that. I think I was farting around with something else. So the other thing I did is in the GA, I went ahead and started building out some of the functionality. I just have it creating the projectile, and it's getting a spawn transform. And the way I'm doing the spawn transform is I created an interface. So I made a new folder in my blueprints folder called interfaces. In there, I went right click, blueprints, blueprint interface. That created an iSpawn, and then I renamed it iSpawn bullets. And then I added a function in here using the drop down here, and I called that function get spawn transform. And then I have it just output a single spawn transform. I just use the plus icon here to add an output there. So this is an interface that I'm going to implement on the character that just returns where I want to spawn the bullet. This will be moved later on so that every weapon can have its own set of rules. So I implemented that on the character, which is in blueprints, or no, sorry, first person CPP blueprints, first person character. So the first person character, I went into class settings, and under interfaces, I added iSpawn bullets, which gave me this interface function, get spawn transform. And in here, I'm getting a transform in the same way that was done in the C++ code that I commented out in the file. So I got world transform and just pulled the location off of that. I can go ahead and do world location. It's a little bit cheaper. Well, actually, I don't think it actually makes a difference. I'm pretty sure it gets the transform either way. But since I'm not using the rotation, this sort of reminds me extra that I'm only getting the location, and then I'm getting the control rotation, which just gets my forward vector based on the pawn in most cases, and in our case, definitely being a first-person shooter in this way where we have no abstraction between the pawn location and the mesh rotation. And our controller is like very closely married to our character, and we can even have them at the same world space location. That's totally fine because we're a first-person shooter, so we don't have to worry about like a mesh dancing around all over the place. We just have floaty little arms that are always in the same sort of location, and it kind of simplifies a lot of things, which is really cool. So we can just use the control rotation, which is very inexpensive. And this is just not finishing compiling today. It says no thank you. So that is all I did on the character now, is this interface. And in my gameplay ability, GA fire weapon, I just called that interface off of my owning actor. So this is a default function in gameplay abilities where you can just get owning actor. That is the actor that owns it, which in our case is the player character. There are use cases to instead get the avatar actor from actor info. If you're using like player state owned ability system component, then you would have the player state would be returned by get owning actor, and then get avatar actor would actually return your pawn actor. We should set the owner of the projectile to our owning actor. That way we can use it in our damage calculations in a minute. But this gets my basic functionality where I can shoot the same way I did before. And as soon as this will ever compile, good Lord. Yeah, don't save. Anyway, so now I can hit play and I can shoot my gun. Yay, cool. But I'm not playing the montage and I'm not playing the sound. So real quick, I'm gonna knock those things out. So I'm gonna open up this fire weapon, and after I spawn the actor, just like the way it was in the C++ code, I'm gonna go ahead and play a montage. So the ability system comes with this handy little asynchronous function called play montage and wait. So this function finds the skeletal mesh that is on your character and then plays an animation on it. Now the problem is that this does not return the correct skeletal mesh component by default because first person shooter template is a little effed in a way. So what it will return by default is your character mesh, which is nothing. So this task, play montage and wait, we'll try to play a montage on this mesh that is nothing. So we're not able to use it, which kind of sucks because it has this stop when ability ends, which is super handy in the event that you want to cancel an ability with something that's not another ability playing a montage. It just kind of adds that extra layer of stability to your code. We might get to that in a little bit, but for now, I'm just going to implement play montage, which does still work because it is a function. So first, I'm going to make sure that we actually spawned a projectile by making sure this is valid. Okay, because if it's not valid, then we didn't successfully spawn our projectile for some reason. And I'm going to actually have it try to adjust location and don't spawn if still colliding. Sorry, if it's not valid, I'm going to end the ability. Actually, okay, I'm not going to do that for now because I'm in the middle of doing something else. So I'll do that in a little bit. I just noticed that was wrong, so I'll do it in a second. So, yeah, if we didn't successfully spawn our projectile, then we're actually going to cancel the ability. Oop. Like I mentioned, cancel is slightly different than end ability, and we'll get to that when we get to costing and cooldowns and all that fun jazz, which is pretty cool. So play montage is a skeletal mesh component function, so it needs skeletal mesh. So we're going to get skeletal mesh component. Nope, we're not, because that'll get you the wrong one. So we'll get owning actor from actor info, and we'll do this the super expensive way by making another function in our ispawn, right, content drawer fix this problem. Sorry. So interfaces, ispawn bullets. I'm going to create another function in here. So we have get spawn transform, and we need another function that is get animation mesh, animatable mesh. That'll work. Get animatable mesh, and this is going to return a skeletal mesh component object. Skeletal mesh component. That way I remember that it's the component and not the actual mesh, just in case it decides to matter later. And then I'm going to implement it in the character. Nope. Content, first person CPP, blueprints, first person character. And now I have a new function, get animatable mesh. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the FP gun. Turn that. Oh, FP gun is not blueprint visible, of course. So I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio and open up my character.h function. And in here we have all of these, the mesh, the muzzle location, the camera component with the first person gun is protected. Okay. Oh, I believe I did that actually. That's where I was going with this was we need to mark some of these protected so that the blueprint can access this data. And for the FP gun skeletal mesh component here, we need to actually read it into the blueprint so I can use this blueprint interface because I can't create C++ classes, so I have to use this stupid blueprint interface. I'm going to, instead of read visible defaults only, I'm going to make this blueprint read only. Yeah, so blueprint read only and edit anywhere. Actually, let's do edit no, let's do edit anywhere. No, let's do edit defaults only. So edit defaults only allows me to set it in the class settings and then not in instances when I drag it in the level, whereas edit anywhere allows you to also edit an instance data, which is sometimes useful, of course. All right, so now we're getting it to compile. There's apparently a lot to ask today. Um, so now if I recompile, I don't get that error anymore. Go ahead and save that. And then in my GA fire weapon, I'm getting my owner actor and I'm going to ask for that function, which was get animatable mesh. The skeletal mesh component. And again, they fail silently. Uh, I'm chugging today. So if it's valid, go ahead and play the ability or play the montage. If it's not, go ahead and cancel because I don't have a gun. I made a bullet, which is wonderful, but I don't have a gun, so I can't play a montage. And something's gone terribly wrong, so I feel like cancel is probably the right option here. And we'll allow the montage to play. And then I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a variable just because I know we're going to make child classes of this and I'm going to have to set this to a bunch of different stuff. But for now, I'm just going to set the default to the only montage in the template project, first person fire montage. All right, so by ending the ability right away, I ensure that it can definitely fire again. Like immediately that frame, the next frame. I guess it should be the next frame. It takes a frame to fire, right? So now I can fire it however many times I want. And I notice that I'm sort of chugging along, and if I run and fire the weapon, I'm pretty sure that's the bullet collision handling. So try to adjust location, down spawn is still colliding. Oop, my mouse is on the fritz. So there goes my chug chug every time I fire. And that seems to be working, although I'm not playing a montage, which is interesting. So I must be returning the wrong mesh. Oh, right. I think it's not actually the gun that plays the animation, right? It's the first person mesh. That makes more sense. See, that's why I named it animatable mesh. It's because I didn't know. So we have, where is this thing? Mesh 1P. Just gonna copy this, paste it up here, and I'm gonna take visible defaults only, and I'm gonna cut and paste down here, just swap the two of them around. Because now I don't need the gun, I actually need the mesh of the arms, of course. Of course it's the arms, because the arms hold the gun, right? Oh, right, they're attached later. I remember now. a member. There it is. Hello, Montage. Okay, so now we have restored the original functionality, and we're using a gameplay ability, which means we're cool. Uh, it means that our code is now encapsulated inside of an ability and can be controlled inside of the ability system component, which is awesome. And we will get into exactly why in the next video. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful adventure. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye. If you like my videos, if you enjoy this series, please like and subscribe to my channel. Please tell your friends, tell everybody who's trying to make games interested in it that it's not so hard. Just watch my tutorial series. I really appreciate it. It helps me continue to make these videos, and hopefully I'll be making a little money out of it here pretty soon. So I appreciate everyone for your support up to this point. I'm actually like 20% of the way to being able to make money off of this. So I appreciate everybody's support so far. I'm really proud of how well all of the series so far have done, and I hope to just continue to build off of this and do something awesome for the community because I know how hard it was for me getting into games for the first time, and now I've been doing it for a better part of a decade, and I want to share that knowledge with everybody else. And so please help me do that and help me make a little bit of money along the way. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, I will see you in the next video.